Oh, Shazam, what did I do? I lost everybody. Yeah, yeah, yeah. When I'm the technical difficulty. Oh, I lost it again. Are we ready to go, Melissa? Okay. All right, Pod fam, buckle up and breathe in that fresh truth air because this morning we're going beyond the screen with a woman who is nothing short of a force of nature. She's a biologist, an occupational therapist, an international speaker, and the author of the groundbreaking book, Virtual Child, translated into 3 languages because the truth knows no borders. Chris Rowan has taken her fire and her facts to 38 countries, delivering on over 450 workshops to teens, parents, teachers, and clinicians. Her message? Well, it's crystal clear. Our children's brains, hearts, and futures are too precious to hand over to the digital Wild West. She's the powerhouse behind the article Unplug, Don't Drug, downloaded over 5,000 times in a peer-reviewed journal. And if that doesn't give her street cred, how about this? She's an advocate for banning cell phones in schools and an active member of the Screens in Schools Committee with Fair Play. She's a legend, folks, to me, by her work and her heart for children. But here's the thing. Chris isn't here to scold. She's here because she cares deeply, fiercely, in a playful, informative way. And she's inviting all of us on a journey to open our eyes, reclaim our kids' potential, and start using technology in service to humanity, not the other way around. So, home based family, open those hearts, lift those ears, and lean in because the one, the only, the absolutely unstoppable Chris Rowan is in the pod room. Hello, Chris.
Hello, I gotta say that's probably the most dynamic intro anyone has ever done for me. Thank you. Wow,
My total pleasure.
I'm
So
impressed.
go. Tell me what you want to say.
Oh, I was just gonna say I'm impressed with myself. Sometimes, we just don't think about what we do. We just do it and keep going, and it's that's very lovely. I'm just in awe of your description of me. Thank you.
Well, what you get to be is in awe of who you are. And when you and I first connected, I was breathless with just how incredibly informed you are. And you are boots on the ground with children as an occupational therapist. And I really want to start there. You said before we went live that you've been doing this for 30 years. And I see so much value in that because you have watched what I call the digital creep. And when did you really realize that screens were not just tools, but really threats to our children's neurobiology?
So I've been working 35 years now in pediatrics, primarily in schools. And so when I started, it was like 1 day a week, and this is 35 years ago, and I was working predominantly with children who had neurological, cerebral palsy or Down syndrome or head injuries or, various organic disorders. And quite suddenly, it was about 20 years ago that quite suddenly I started getting referrals for kids who were like throwing chairs across the classroom, who were very aggressive, children who had very poor self-regulation, children who had really extreme developmental delay that was not due to any genetic origin, right? And I'm kind of going, well, what is going on? And I started asking this question. Well, maybe it was now 25 years ago, I started asking my kids that I'm seeing, as well as when I did the parent teacher meetings, how much screen time are you getting? And back then it was TV and video games. And I started seeing that a lot of these kids that were getting diagnosed with ADHD were actually kids who were playing a lot of video games and watching a lot of TV. And I'm a biologist and an occupational therapist. I'm very evidence-based. I'm very research referenced. I think we need to really cite research when we're in this area, because there's a lot of opinions flying out there, and the tech industry is so powerful, and it's literally their key goal is to make money through addiction and getting us all addicted, right? So we can't really listen to them, right? They're not an authority. And so the authority people I look to is our pediatric communities, the American Academy of Pediatrics, Canadian Pediatric Society, and they collate research, and I read that research, and then I started getting more and more and more alarmed and realizing that there really was a connection. This is a long time ago. I saw it, and I looked at the research, and it was there already, showing us detrimental effects of screen time on kids. So I really kind of shifted my focus, because I thought, until we deal with screen overuse by children, it's just ridiculous to have us as clinicians out there treating all these disorders that are actually caused by screen overuse, right? So, there's a huge diagnostic thing going on now with ADHD and autism and bipolar disorder and depression, anxiety, a lot of anxiety and depression in kids today. And, rather than giving kids a pill, let's look at their screen use and help them to develop more healthy lifestyles.
Yeah, so important. Now, I read an article once where for your eyes and for, what's happening in your brain, and I really would love for you to shoot me straight on this one, that it's better to have technology that's further away. So a TV is better for your brain than something like this. And then in between the brain and the phone screen is your laptop. And in between your laptop and your phone screen is your iPad. So the thing we carry closest to our face is typically, well, that's probably out the window now, because I see kids with iPads right on their noses. So is there any data that says that the further the screen is away from us, that the better it is for our neurobiology?
Absolutely, from so many perspectives. So there is no distance here to have anything other than just the screen, meaning that when the screen's right here, we don't notice people around us. We don't notice that our mom just walked through the room, or that, there's a fire in the kitchen, right? You just don't notice because you're right into it, right? So there's what the research shows us is that there's more of an immersion factor when the screen is closer, right? We get more immersed, we get more obsessed and focused and attentive to that screen. There's just so many other things that are going on too. There's a huge rise in myopia, which is nearsightedness, because of this very factor. Is our eyes are controlled by muscles. There's 6 muscles in each eye, and we want to be like looking over there and looking over there, and we want to be looking near and looking far and looking close to things and looking far away from things, for those muscles to actually work and coordinate. And this is super important for reading and the ability to print and do math and do a lot of things at school. If that system's not working well, then the kid's going to have problems. So what what the data is showing with the increased myopia is due also to distance, right? We want those muscles to be moving. If we have just a screen in front of us and it's this big, right? Our eyes are just darting like tiny little movements, right? As opposed to if, there's a TV way across the room and there's a lot of other stuff going on around us, we're going to get more exercise, right, to our muscles. I could go on and on and on with what happens, in the distance factor, but the biggest one for me is we lose human connection. So we disconnect from humans as we connect to the screens, and what we want to start thinking about is disconnecting from the screens and reconnecting to humanity.
Well,
So back to
before we go down that very important path, I think I want to stay on this a little bit longer, because I feel as though that we are taking a lot of this for, que sera, sera, for granted. And one thing that I know is very important to the structure of the human body is a good posture, so that when I go to the chiropractor and get in aligned, if all of my spine is in alignment, my body is firing. My nervous system is firing more versus blocked energy from my spine out of alignment. I'm well aware of this because I have minor scoliosis and I grew very fast. So I've worked on my posture pretty much for 30, 40 years. And one of the things that I've noticed even with children is this thing called tech neck, and this pitching forward, which I feel as though is not just a visual thing. I feel as though that is actually impacting their biology, how their circuitry in their body works, and that they get so used to going forward that there's this physical impact that we're getting from screens that people aren't talking about. It's part of this whole sweeping it under the rug that I see everybody doing. And when I mentioned that you were mentioned by Richard Fried in our other conversation, he was saying that you see a lot of children with delayed walking and delayed speech.
So it's good to do a little just brief review of child development. So let's think of our little babies. You know, when they're born, they're all floppy, right? They can't even hold their head up. And the first thing that comes in there into play is, oh, look, they're holding their head up. And now they're kind of holding their body up. And now and what they're doing is then they're starting to activate some things away from the center of the body, like the shoulder girdles and the pelvic girdles. They start kicking in, the muscles start kicking in. And so suddenly, at the age of a year, they're not only standing, but they're doing, preliminary walking. So what's happening there is through movement, the body develops. When we have no movement, the body doesn't develop. So just think of a child that's on a swing, that's swinging back and forth. What's being activated there is the vestibular system in the brain, which is two sets of canals. There's 3 different canals in 3 different planes. And in those canals is fluid. And in the canals also is these hair cells that move with the fluid. And at the base of the hair cells, a receptor that fires information to the brain, and it says, get back to center. Okay, so little kids swinging forward and the gravitational forces are pushing the child backward, right? The vestibular system senses that and it goes, sit up, contract front, bring yourself into center, right? And then the swing goes the other way and the reverse happens. So this is the building of core, which is what you're talking about, core stability. Spinal muscles and all of the big muscles surrounding the spine and your glutes and your abs and your quadriceps all start activating to bring the child into center and create core. So children develop from core outward. And the secondary thing to developing a strong core and good posture is motor coordination. So the muscles then start talking to each other and we start building purposeful movements where we can reach forward, pick up a glass, throw a ball, all that sort of stuff, right? So movement is key to development of core and motor coordination. And children who don't move are what I call schlumpy. So here's your tech neck, right? So they don't even know where their center is. Many kids will say, okay, so let's see if you can sit up really straight, right? You can stand really straight. And they can't. They're just, I call them schlumpy, right? They don't have a strong core. So what's going to happen is the motor units that have to talk to each other and have to coordinate are not going to happen. And so we're going to see problems with, they go to clap and the eye hand isn't working. So they never are going to be able to print, or their printing is going to be really sloppy. The 2 eyes aren't talking to each other, right? Because again, we talked about the eye muscles have to coordinate to be able to read, right? To locate, track the sentence, dislocate, read, so that it's really important for printing, reading, and even the spatial concepts that are foundational to math to have the strong core. So without core, we don't get motor coordination. Without motor coordination, we're not going to attain literacy. So my blog is called Moving to Learn. And this is my area of expertise, is how does movement translate to learning. Now, we just talked about one thing because you brought forward posture, right? But movement helps so many other things. It increases attention, it increases your ability to memorize things, it increases your cardiovascular system, which we haven't even talked about yet. So we really want to be moving so that we can strengthen the heart and lungs. Those are crucial, right? Crucial. And that cardiovascular system is going to ensure that we don't get it when we stimulate it, that we don't have heart attacks, that we don't have strokes. So there's a lot that goes on with movement, and movement actually wakes kids up. So when kids show up at school and they've been up gaming all night, or some family thing going on and they didn't get good sleep, if they stand at a desk in the classroom instead of sit, you're going to get a more aroused brain. You're going to get a more alert, brain. So movement's really key. And I'm seeing so many kids that have huge developmental delays. Speech is a big one. This is all muscles, lips, tongue, cheeks, all muscles. Don't use it, you're going to lose it. So we're seeing little children coming in kindergarten and they don't have intelligible speech. And that's so hard for that child because they keep trying to tell the other kids something or tell the teacher something, and that nobody understands them, right? So we're seeing significant speech delays at school entry that are hugely impacting on their sociability, their ability to be social.
So, okay. I think this is all super, super important. Let's go into, we've got the biology. Let's go into the neurology, because the biology, I think, is observed in a portion, especially in our younger babies, but we are having a digital impact that is not necessarily visually seen or demonstrated with the external world. What are you seeing with the neurological impact of that is impacting our children?
So just as I gave you a brief review of body development, let's talk about brain development. So when an infant's born, if we were to look at their brain, a good way to vision it is like a map, and there's roads everywhere. So when a child's born, all of the tracks, the major neuronal tracks, are there, and they go to every part of the brain. So, like I say, it'd be looking like a road map, and all the major highways are there, and they're connecting every single area of the brain. So two processes happen after birth in children, and one is called pruning and the other is called proliferation. So what happens to those nerves based on the environment of the child, this is so important to understand, is brains wire based on the environment of the child, based on how enriched the environment is or how poor the environment is in stimulus and input. So let's talk about pruning. So what will happen over the course of the lifetime in the brain is 2/3 of those roads are going to get pruned. And the brain does this because it's really quite miraculous, is it wants to get efficient. So it kind of says, well, we've got 3 roads that are, going here. We really only need one because they're not using the other 2, right? So the brain prunes neurons based on the exposure to the different stimuluses. So what we want is we want to save neurons, save those big roads to go to every single part of the brain. And what we're seeing in studies as early as age 12 is that kids who use over 4 hours a day of what we term mindless content, here's another conversation to have, so mindless content's anything that's entertainment based, right? It's where the brain's not thinking, it's just passively watching stuff. 2/3 of the neurons are going to get pruned by the time the person dies, by the time they reach, an old, age, whatever that might be. And so the roads that get pruned are the ones that are not getting used. And so what we're seeing in these early studies is that the brain is pruning roads to the frontal lobes. Now, this is really, really important because we have evolved as humans to use our frontal lobes. I mean, some of the lower animal species don't, right? So I call this the de-evolution of the human species. We're de-evolving, we're pruning tracks to frontal lobe because we're not using frontal lobe. Now, frontal lobe is where we have our what's termed executive function and memory, concentration, understanding stimulus response, consequence to action, being able to self-regulate, being able to control their energy states. Like there's so much that goes on. And when I talk to teachers, I'm like, to be able to teach, you need kids' frontal lobes. Absolutely. You can't teach to a child without frontal lobe. But yet every time you hand them a screen and they're doing their their video games, they're actually like reversing all the teaching that the learning that just happened, right?
Okay,
So
but so really quickly, I want you to stay on that, but I have to get a clarification point in here right now. So when you're speaking to teachers and you're talking about this, are you said, what was the word you used for mindless use, mindless engagement? The pruning happens with over 4 hours, but would ed tech be a part of that? Is that digital use or is that mindless use?
this is mindless use, but now we're going to go off on a whole nother tangent talking about ed tech. So much of ed tech, I would say the majority of what teachers term to be educational is mindless. So I work in schools. I've walked the halls. I've seen the dark rooms. I've seen the classrooms watching cartoons during lunch, watching movies, watching YouTube videos. There's a huge preponderance of crap that's going into our kids' brains in schools under the guise of ed tech, right? So an educational, let's talk about mindful content to contrast with the mindless content. Mindful content is something you learn from, right? So a nature show, you're watching how to cook something, you're watching how to build something. So there is a lot of mindful content out there that could preserve frontal lobe, right? We just want to make that active, right? But when you have a whole classroom of kids like watching the Titanic and they're like, you can't tell me that they're learning anything. And this
Right.
is the issue that I see with teachers. They're not checking to see if there's any retention of information, application of information. Like, as I watch this little YouTube video, and then I want you to write something about what you saw or answer this question or whatever. And I'll wander around the classroom. I often have a little rolly chair that I get, like, and I roll around in between the desks. I just say, "Hey, what are you doing?" Oh, I don't know. Like, what was the teacher wanting you to do? I don't know. Like, and they're not retaining, nor are they able to apply or like change or, like learning is an active, it's a verb, right? Learning, it's a verb. They need to be able to kind of light their brain up and be able to do something with whatever that information is. But I see a lot of kids falling asleep in classrooms, and so that is not mindful content, that's mindless content.
Okay, so that's the neurology. That's what's happening in the brain. Is there anything else that we need to touch on there?
So in addition to this pruning that happens, 2/3 of the neurons get pruned, is we also have something called proliferation. So we have little connections that grow in between those big neurons and little feeders that connect. And again, it's the brain's all about efficiency. Brain development is about becoming efficient and wiring the brain in result to what we're exposing that child to. So the proliferation happens again based on what the kid watches. What we're seeing is we're seeing that a lot of proliferation in the midbrain in the reactivity center and in the limbic center, the emotional center, lots of proliferation and neurons forming there, but very little in the frontal lobe. So, so what we're seeing is we're seeing a child who can't self-regulate, who can't control their impulses, who's highly reactive because of what they watch. When they watch really fast-paced, violent stimuli, which is video games, or a lot of the mindless social media, all of social media, by the way, is mindless and it's not social, is we're seeing again not good brain development in the frontal lobe, which is what we really need. That's what's going to make us stand out as successful in the species, hierarchy.
So, okay. So now we've gone the physical biology, we've gone into the neurology, and you brought us so perfectly into the behavioral part of this. Speak to us about that.
So I just was talking about the limbic system. You're gonna have interview Hilary Cash, Dr. Hilary Cash, who she really kind of woke me up on this, on something she terms limbic resonance. So when our limbic system is active, we are able then to like connect. Like right now, I'm connecting to you, Brittany, because I see you and I watch your face. And when you kind of go like this, I think, oh, I'm not explaining this good enough. Or,
I don't
we're
think I've done that yet. I'm
resonating.
following you. I'm tracking.
We're resonating with each
Yes,
other,
thank you.
right?
Yeah.
And that's a human trait that we're born with. Like just look at mom and baby, or dad and baby, like that there's an energetic thing going on there between them, and their limbic systems and other areas of the brain are really lighting up. And so that's what we want, right? But when we expose a child to lack of human, right? So the screen is not a human. Even though they're watching people on the screen, they're not human. At a very early age, children start to realize this, and they start to, they move through a very critical period, which is from 9 to 18 months, is the critical period for establishing this human connection piece, the social piece. And so just imagine, if I'm an infant and you're my mom, Brittany, you go, oh, baby, what's going on? And then I feel good, right? I feel good. And this is the origins of attachment, functional attachment, right? Is I say, and you respond with a comforting, or I'm hungry and I cry and you put a boob or a bottle in my mouth, or what, you actually react appropriately to my bid for some attention, right? So if a child's in front of a screen, the child is actively trying to connect with whatever's on the screen, and they're kind of going like, eh, like they're making their faces. And you'll see this in really young infants, 6 to 9 months,
Yes,
very young,
absolutely.
and
Yes.
they're seeking affirmative, action by that thing on the screen, and they're not getting it, right? So even though, and then if they look, grumpy or sad, the screen doesn't change. They look happy, the screen doesn't change. They cry, the screen doesn't change, right? And so they realize very quickly that they need to just pull back. That this is not, I guess this isn't going to work, right? And we know that without a functional attachment, children die, right? This is a life force. This what I'm talking about, this connection between infant and parent, is a life force that they absolutely, the infant knows this intrinsically. If they don't, and this is, we see this in animals too, if they don't form an attachment with the parent, they will die, hence the runt of the litter, right? So this is a life force, and it's extremely important that they establish this. And so what early studies are showing now is this critical period, this 9 to 18 months. If a child has a lot of screen and not enough parent and sibling attention, not enough play, not enough like attachment, that they're developing what they're terming virtual autism.
Right.
So autism again is a social disorder, and it's a child who doesn't understand those nuances. They can't read faces, they can't express themselves very well. And so, the expression of self happens in relation to other people. It doesn't develop singularly with a screen. So we have many kids growing up who have like no sense of self. They don't know who they are. They don't know what they want. They're creating these profiles on these, social media apps, and they're so struggling with anxiety, and because they can't connect anymore. You've all seen it. Kids all sitting on the bus and they're on their phones, kind of talking to each other right through the phone. The phone becomes an interface
Right.
or a barrier to
Well,
establishing this
and
human connection.
it becomes the crutch, the fallback that I see. I have um I have parameters around screen time, and one of the reasons I pulled my kids out of school was because they were on screens constantly, and they can't do simple things that we've been practicing daily for years without being prompted, which is make your bed, brush your teeth, brush your hair, put your clothes in the bin, and do your laundry and keep the kitchen clean. And they don't have this, and I understand some of it is brain development, just processing. But I know with when they were in Montessori schools, they had all of the forethought to put their shoes by the door or in an organized way, and to sweep the floor and to clean up after they ate. So they had the capacity when they were, 3, 4 years old at Montessori, 5 years old at Montessori, and now they're 14, 12, and 9. And I opened the pantry the other day, and I have 3 boys. There was 4 empty packages. Like they'd eaten everything out of the package, but didn't throw the package away. And it's like, this is basic humaning that I got, and I'm a girl, and girls tend to be more motherly and organized, but I just see basic things not coming into activation. And I think that when you say that a child that doesn't connect dies, and we don't have an epidemic of children dying. What we do have that I really think is aligned with what you're saying, but I don't know if I'm right or wrong. It's just my opinion. Is that we have an epidemic of kids almost dead inside. They don't know who they are. They don't have self-identity. They are, rambles in the wind that just go with whoever gives them attention in the moment. And this is where we go from the behavioral into the emotional. I feel as though that we have a huge problem with healthy attachment and healthy interaction, and knowing how to be in conversation with each other in a way that grows what you started this, back 20 minutes ago, talking about connection.
I so agree with you. What I'm seeing is, I might get a referral for a child who has tantrums, say, and outbursts. And what I go and I work with the child for a bit, and I'm going, this child is not attached. They're not attached to anyone in this classroom. They're not attached to the teacher. Again, back to the screens, one of the salient roles of the teacher in a classroom is to form attachments with the child. So let's say a child is in a home is overusing screens, and the parents aren't available for this social emotional piece happening. The onus falls on the teacher to make that happen. As soon as the teacher allows screen use, you're negating what that child actually really needs. So, kids who are running out of the classroom and bolting, and, that's a very disorganized attachment scenario. The child has a very dysfunctional and disorganized attachment to parents. And the other thing I'm seeing a lot of is trauma. So, kids who watch a lot of violence, you become kind of what you watch, right? In many ways. And I think some of the stuff we're seeing, like especially in the US right now, all this hatred that's going on, between everybody, it's just like, it's just hate speech constantly going on. And this is a real end result now in adults that we're seeing from that early disconnection. So frequently I just, the salient piece here, the number one step for families and classrooms is to disconnect and reconnect, is to experience the importance of just being there as a a dyad with kids, right? We want to be there and start having conversations with our kids, eye contact, and say things like, I see you, like, Brittany, I see right now, you're looking tired, you're looking sad, you're looking upset, you're looking, children need to be seen. And that's the first step. Because then they can go, oh, thank God, somebody sees me. They understand. So I see, I hear are two phrases that should be frequented by parents and teachers, and it will go a long way towards forming that attachment. Once that child feels attached, then they can start to learn, right? So, you were talking, Brittany, about your kids, and they knew how to put their backpacks away and their garbage in the garbage and whatever when they were 4, but now they're teenagers. Is again, this learning piece is really missing. And so we're losing those connections to the frontal lobe, and the frontal lobe is where we learn. And if we don't have frontal lobe, a functioning frontal lobe, we're not going to be able to learn. We're just going to be reactive. We're just going to be working from that midbrain level and just be reacting to everything that's going on, but not being able to learn or form those important social connections.
I've heard what you're saying and I fully agree with it. And I'm having like a light bulb moment with this conversation, because we are so much in a reactive society right now.
Mm.
And it is this, it's this punching back and forth. And people, yesterday we spoke with Howard Martin and we were talking about the collective consciousness, and that energetically, what is the science that proves we are energetically all connected? And we are picking up what's in our environment. We pick up what's in our nucleus environment, and that's the connection, starts out really small with the parent-child bond. And then that bond gets further and further outstretched the older the child gets, and they learn that their environment is safe and trustworthy, and that they are well, again, they're safe to go be in the world. That's the whole process with when we were talking to Lenore Skenazy about let grow and free play, free range kids, is that when you have a child that goes out 2 feet, 3 feet, 4 feet, and they look back and they see that you're there, they're building that attachment, that hidden cord of attachment, that unseen cord of attachment. And so then the child is also building confidence and security within themselves. Their self-identity is evolving, that they know they can go further away and they can turn around and mom's right there. And that's on the playground, but that's also metaphorically for in life, that while they're building their self-identity and the fullness of who they are and understanding who they are, they need to have that attachment understanding that, what I'm hearing you say, kids are really missing out on, because they're spending so much time on technology and healthy attachments aren't being formed. The other part of that light bulb moment is like, play that out to teen depression, because we don't know how to attach, and teen bullying is so big, and kids feel so don't have identity, and they don't know who they are, and someone puts them down and their worlds collapse because they don't have an internal structure of self. And then play that out into 20 somethings, and the inability right now, we have the inability for kids to keep jobs. It's moving more into a gig economy because kids don't know how to go somewhere and stay somewhere, and they use very, very social constructs like, it didn't work for my boundaries, and they intellectualize it without having the grit to stay with it. And then you play that out more into family life and marriage, and you get into a marriage based on typically things that you think will last a lifetime. But if you're not, if you're not able to communicate and feel seen, and you establish that before you get married, when you throw kids into the mix and that addiction cycle starts again, you're a bomb's going off. And I like the way you just said that had a huge like social global impact for me. Are we dealing with, is it this big? The way I see it, is that accurate? Is it this big of a problem?
It's huge. Scares the heck out of me, seriously. I want to go back. This will make sense once I start to explain this, but I want to go back to Bowlby's attachment theory. Because he was an epic researcher who he and Mary Ainsworth were, kind of like really key in helping us to understand what is this attachment, what is human attachment. And what he describes is when you're a parent, you have two jobs, for your child. Is one is to create a safe haven so that they can come back, they can go out and explore the world. But oh, I got hurt, Johnny got hurt, mom comes and picks him up, dad gives him a hug. You create this safe haven so that the child feels safe. That safety, you talked about the safety, it's crucial for, it's foundational for further development. Is if a child doesn't feel safe, and many children don't, and they watch all these scary movies and play scary video games, they really think the world is a scary place, and they're getting cyberbullied and people are being mean to them. They don't feel safe, right? If you don't feel safe, you can't learn. That's super crucial. So parents are usually pretty good about creating the safe haven. What I'm seeing is the second part of parenting is that you need to launch your kids, right? So you need to prepare them so that at the age of 18, they're going to actually leave your house and go out and become, a successful person. They're going to be happy, they're going to be healthy, they're going to have relationships, they're going to have jobs, they're going to create little grandchildren for you. So what I'm seeing is that parents are, they're all fixated on this safe haven. So they keep their kids home. They keep their kids glued to screens. Many parents, I see parents with teenagers, like the kid has no friends, online all the time, dropped out of school. This is a frequent referral for me. About grade 10, they drop out, sometimes grade 9, just can't cut it anymore. And they're at home and they're in behind the locked door. And
Hold on. How does a 9-year-old drop out of school? That's more
grade
like,
9, grade 9.
how does a grade 9 drop out of school? To me, that's like college. I'm not going to go to college, but
You
where's the,
need to check. I don't know the US stats, but the absenteeism rate in schools today is atrocious. It plummeted during COVID. Many kids are being homeschooled, but nothing's going on. Like it's a huge issue. The not only the absenteeism, but kids show up in high school whenever they kind of wake up. And this is a huge issue. Like, if you've been up gaming all night, well, you really don't really want to go to school in the morning. And this has somehow become acceptable.
well,
So
parents have to go to work.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So
You know,
this is a big problem. Talk to any teacher, and they will tell you that the absenteeism rate in schools today is appalling. And schools can only do so much. If a parent allows a child to stay at home, then there's nothing the school can do, right? So this is the launch piece is not happening. And parents, what I'm seeing with parents, and it's called ambivalent attachment. So they're forming this attachment with the child where they want the child to be safe, they want the child to do all these things for them. That's what ambivalent is you parent in a style that makes you feel okay, that lowers your anxiety. So if they keep the kid at home and the kid doesn't go out and go partying, the kid doesn't go, they're 12, they don't, not allowed to ride their bike to the store because somebody might, attack them, or pedophiles out there on every corner. when you have that kind of parent that has high anxiety, which is fueled by all this crazy, social media stuff we've got, it just fuels fear in parents. And so that type of parent, that they put these pressures on the kid, like you've got to do all this stuff to make me feel less anxious, right? And that's what the parenting style that I see today is. And so they're not letting the kids grow up. They're not teaching basic skills like brush your teeth, like have a shower, here, cook. Like for my son, who's 42 now, so this is many years ago, but when he was about 12, he had games. He had a Sega, he had a Commodore 64 computer with Pong. You remember that?
I
Little
sure do.
paddles and the Pong ball. And he had a little TV in his bedroom, which is like, this is what really got me started on a lot of this, right? Is I started losing my kid. I was like, and he was getting belligerent and obnoxious, and he would like fart at dinner, and he was just like, oh, how was your day? Fine. Like get these one word, responses. I was like, where'd my kid go? So I threw all this stuff out, like literally took it to the dump in a rage. When I'm not suggesting parents do this, but I did, because I thought, I want my son back. And I added chores. Okay. So I said, you've got to do these 2 chores every week. And on Fridays, you need to make dinner for the family. And I told him he can invite as many friends over as he wants. He just needs to kind of tell me what's the menu on Thursday, so I can lay in the groceries, and how many kids are coming over. Well, this thing just exploded. First, it was guys, all the guys came over, and it was just hilarious to watch them all in the kitchen, like arguing about, how to make a Caesar salad and stuff. But they were actually learning life skills. They were learning how to plan a menu. They were learning, and I had no part in it. I would stay downstairs, right? Stay out of their space, right? But get to eat their dinner. So then they were, I think it was 13 or 14. One day I came home from work, and there they all were in the kitchen, and they were dressed in 3-piece suits. So I don't know if you guys remember those, but the vest, the
Yes.
jacket, these hilarious suits, right? And I was like, what the heck's going on, right? And they were just totally mum about it, like, I was like, well, you guys look really nice. Like, I don't know what's going on, right? And then the next week, the girls were invited over, right? And they made 3 courses. They were so proud of this dinner, right? So this is the thing we're missing, we've got to restrict the screens. We've got to get this crap out of their bedrooms. Not allowed to take that stuff in your bedroom at nights for sleeping. And we need to give them chores, because when kids do chores, that's the origins of building that self-identity. The book Dopamine Nation by Anna Lembrook, really interesting. So she talks about, the brain releases dopamine when you're engaged in screens. And dopamine's kind of a real like high, neurotransmitter. It makes you feel really, really good, right? Is that what we need to do is replace the screens with something else that increases dopamine, which is doing nice things for each other. This is Anna, she's a neuroscientist, and she's saying that kids should do nice things for each other and their parents, right? So, chores. And when there is that expectation and a consequence if they don't do the chores, when there's an expectation that they cook dinner every Friday night and that they do 2 chores a week, then it's an opportunity for them to do something nice for their parents. And they feel good about that. They're not going to tell you they feel good. They're gonna gripe and grump, and like, I don't want to do it. Oh, my mom makes me do that, and she won't let me go to the park, and that kind of stuff. But I saw with my daughter one time, I said, no, you haven't done your chore, you're not going out tonight, right? And so she was talking to her friend on the phone, and she was like, this is when we had phones, and she said, oh, my mom won't let me. And then she had this little smile, kind of like this, right? And I thought, I'm missing something here. You know, like that she actually really liked that. You
Right.
know, she liked that she had a mom who said no. So, you
She
know,
knew
this
her
is where
container.
back to the launch, we've got to start launching our kids and
Yeah.
preparing them
Yeah.
for adulthood early,
Well,
early.
that's why I'm doing this, Chris, because I feel as though that, and I've watched it in my own home. I'm a two family home with being divorced, and the rules for technology are different at both homes. And that's been a journey getting my ex-husband to see the data that I send to him about this and how important it is to keep kids off technology for this. You know, it's fascinating how quickly we lose touch with the importance of that. I mean, my ex-husband grew up on a farm, and worked a farm. And so I feel as though that we have what I see in my own world is just a microcosm of what's happening in the world out there, and that we justify our way through these things, and we say, they need it for their social. I know when kids lose their phone, the very common thing is, well, thanks for taking away my social network. And they've become, I use the language of, we have low grade addiction in most family homes across America. And when you are dealing with someone that has an addiction, you go to a program and you understand the nuances, the subtleties, all the things that need to be tended to support the addict in coming out of that addiction and empowering themselves to live a sober life, whatever that sobriety is. And we need tools. So we are not, I think, because the word is so loaded, ready to say, I have addicted children. And we do not have resources to support families on coming through and rewiring their children's brains and what that looks like to overcome the low grade addiction that is rampant. And I can speak for our country. You could speak more nationally with the 38 countries you've spoken to, but we have to be bold and courageous to say there is a seismic problem here. And we need to return to, as some people are saying, more of an analog reality. And that is going back to yesteryear and looking at all that came from that, and, skinned knees, dirt under their fingernails. My kids don't know how to be bored because their default, which I've witnessed, is, and homeschooling was a huge learning curve in that, because there was online learning, and it just became, no, you're not learning, you're goofing off on your screens and you're telling me you're learning. So I get that, I really do. It's just the impetus for all of this. How do we support parents in having the courage to start turning this bus around? Or I would say freight train, actually.
When I do parent workshops, I do this thing where I just say to everybody, okay, we're going to practice to say the word no, because it's, you've sort of forgotten how to say this word, right? And so I go 1, 2, 3, and we all go no. And then I go, okay, that wasn't very affirmative, right? That's kind of like pretty pansy. Let's do it again. Is to say, to feel, dig deep down and feel what you think is right for your child. Every parent can do this. I've never met a parent who doesn't know what's right for their child. So what's right for your child is different than what's right for my child, whatever. But when you know what's right, then you stick to that consistently and make your two rules. I usually suggest, for any kid, they can't, it doesn't matter what age, they can't remember and you can't enforce more than 2 or 3 rules, right? So choose your rules wisely and choose your rules that are going to sustain your family. So dig deep, go back to your past, talk to your parents about their past. What were some really salient things that you did as a family, and try to re grab onto those, right? So let's say it's family dinner. Well, we always had dinner on Sunday and grandma and grandpa came over, or we always, on Saturday went to the beach, or we did we all cleaned the house on Saturday morning together as a family when I was a kid, right? When I was a kid, I could tell you all kinds of stuff when I was a kid. My mother had a calendar on the fridge. I had 2 brothers, and we were assigned a task every day Like that, look at the fridge and geez, I've got to empty the dishwasher today, so she rotated tasks and made them, cross gender. Like sometimes I go out and my dad and fix the car, so but we all had a job that we had to do every day, and that was, if we didn't do our job, we didn't get an allowance. And I'm not saying you should give your kids an allowance or you shouldn't or whatever. Just figure out talk to your partner. If you don't have a partner, just, maybe talk to a parent, talk to a friend, and kind of like determine your rules. And then the first step is disconnect yourself first. So too many parents I find are pointing the finger at the kid. It's the kid's problem. The kid can't control their device. Well, here, I'm on my phone and I'm going, my kid just can't control their device, like a kid, social models on the parent. Like parents are the best and the most salient teachers of the child, right? But they look at us, they watch us, and if they see where we're not being true to what we're saying, where we pick up the phone every time it beeps, then they're going to do that, right? Of course. So we start with ourselves. So we come up with our rules, but we impose those rules on ourselves first, and we clean up our own act, with the phone. So the best thing with the phone is out of sight, out of mind, and the tablets and the TV. I was just reading a blog I'm on. Somebody said, like, we moved, and I left the TVs in the garage. I haven't even unpacked them yet, and I think I'm not going to unpack them, right? So making those kind of choices, having a drawer, where maybe it's wired so that you can plug cell phones in, and everything goes in that drawer for meals. Like having, where you're going to do a 1 day a week unplug. So maybe it's going to be Saturday. You're going to clean the house and you're going to go do some sports games with the kids or whatever. You're going to do your shopping. You're going to, maybe go to somebody's house for dinner, have people over to your house for dinner. That's something I just don't see anymore. I don't see, like parties and, the block party idea that we had when we were kids. All the neighbors came over, the neighbors we didn't like and the neighbors we did like, and we had a block party usually on 4th of July. This is down in the US. And then there was some other time in the summer, usually we'd have another block party, right? So it's starting with ourselves and starting with simple rules, and then really focusing on, and I'm wondering if you're, Brittany, if you're a tech person, could put up this slide here. This is called Building Foundations. And down at the bottom, you can see that there's 4 foundations for growing a successful, sustainable human being. So we've talked about movement. They have to move. I haven't talked yet about touch and human connection. The next one there on the bottom, I'm on the green, reading the green line. Touch and human connection activate our attachment system and our parasympathetic system to calm. So with touch and with human connection, we're going to see a calmer child. And then the last critical factor is nature, which also activates this parasympathetic system. So when kids get lots of that, lots of movement, touch, human connection, and nature, then they become strong and coordinated. We talked about that, strong core and motor coordination. They become secure and regulated with that attachment, calm and focused. Their body and brains develop optimally. They can pay attention and learn, and they're going to be a sustainable human being. So what we want to do is focus on putting more of the movement, touch, human connection, and nature into our kids' lives. So we unplug ourselves first. We come up with a couple of rules, but we need to fill all that time spent with screens with other stuff. And our jobs as parents and teachers is we've kind of done a bad deed here, and the way to reverse it and get out of this is to really start focusing on the critical factors for the developing child, on these four critical factors. So I've developed a concept called balanced technology management. So we want to balance screens with healthy activity. If we have lots of screen time, healthy activities right off the board, right? If we start increasing healthy activity, automatically screen use will go down. So if we just focus on screen use and we take things away from kids, they're left with nothing. They have no skills, they have no confidence or competence in skills. They've got nothing going on, And so we really have to, what I suggest is to make sure, whether you're in a classroom or you're in a home, is that we're creating lots of cool stuff for kids to do other than screens. They're going to be far more likely to put that screen down if there's something there that they really cherish and that makes them feel good. So here's where you want to start planning activities. Like, I work a lot in schools, right? So I work with the students. Like, this is a question I ask a lot. What would make you put down the screen and go outside and play? Well, our playground sucks, or especially for teens need playgrounds too. They need those fit core centers. They need, like in the foyers I work with my local school with a group of teens there, and they have developed a huge array of activities that go on in the foyer. And then they developed a rule, no screens in the foyer. So the foyer is a great big open space where they eat their lunch and stuff. But, they added pool tables, hockey, what's that? Air hockey, foosball, ping pong, so they put a lot of stuff in the surrounding area. They have chess tournaments, they have checker tournaments, they've got Monopoly boards. So what they focused on is let's make it more attractive for kids to put down the screens. Because I think it's really punitive for parents and teachers to say, put that away, put that away. Right. But yet they put it away, and then what else is there? What is there for them to do?
I even feel strongly that it's, at home that I've said to my children, technology is a privilege. It's not a right. And if you are doing technology to advance yourself, that's a different category than technology for mindless consumption. And we have parameters around that. Like, they're not allowed to watch gamers, because I say, do not spend time watching other people advance their lives. Go advance your life. What are you going to do? Go find an interest. And also, what did you learn after that? So I asked them questions to give me feedback on how was that time spent and what's the value you got from that time. And the thing that I see with my children is that, you can have that technology after the chores are done. And this is something that I've just really started to get very firm on, because what I hear you saying is, yes, parents, there is this very real part to all of this, where parents, it's just, there's this resignation. It's just the way it is. I have to work. Parents are strapped more than they were when you and I were growing up. Most families have dual income households, because we've bought into this belief that the more I have, the better I am. Consumption equals our identity on some level, and we have to keep up with the Joneses. It's all a very real thing. I mean, you will drive places and people will have more money in their car than they do in their house because of what it looks like as they drive around in the world. So we have this new social construct that is hitting at us from all different angles of the demands and the pressures. And you have the social pressures for the kids, but then you also have the pressures for the parents to provide for the kids. And then you have the breakdown in communication, which is why we're having communication experts on here. The breakdown in communication that makes this all so feisty and fiery that parents are like, yeah, I need a break. I can't keep every day go face to face, toe to toe, glove to glove with the tech monster that's consuming my child. And I think a lot of parents are just like, peace out, yo. when I asked for advice on this, I got, just I'm holding my breath till I leave for college. Well, I have kids that aren't even in high school yet. I'm not normalizing that, or it is what it is. It's a different world today. Then if I had a penny for every time I've heard that, the world's just different now. That's such resignation. And I feel very strongly that we have to have the courage to lift the blinders and say, it doesn't have to be that way. And that it doesn't have to be a replacement for something. It's just kids need ideas. Make a meal, as you did with your son. Make a meal. You know what? Mom's had a huge week. Why don't we celebrate with cookies? Who's going to make them? And I'm not a fan of always celebrating with sugar, but bringing them into the community of the family, and that getting kids to not just think about themselves, which they are biologically and genetically wired to do in the beginning of their lives. Their world is super, super small, and it's very self-focused. And we support that because we want them, we're focused on them building identity. That's where it stems from in a lot of respects. But we need to get children to understand that they are a part of a unit. And we need parents to really take back control, that they are the shepherds, they're the spearheads, they're the way showers of that unit. So you've got the parents that have to really take ownership of that rightful claim of, we're doing this together, guys. Come on. You don't go into battle and the admiral or the captain's like, we're going to go, they're coming at us, just do whatever and we'll see what happens. You don't do that. You're like, you have structure, you have strategy, you're talking to everybody, you're training them, you're making sure that everybody's got their reflexes and they're prepared for what's happening. They're prepared for the experience. And we're not doing that with families. I don't see where we are even supporting families in the school environment. We're not supporting families in the social environment. It's all every man for himself. And I think that, yes, we need to have ideas. Yes, we need to have support structure, but we also have to be super bold and put our hand in the air and say, I'm not normalizing this anymore. I'm not playing in this. And if, my child, my 14-year-old, homeschooled, beautiful boy, pretty present. We have very present conversations, and he's easy to identify his when he behaves and it doesn't match the environment. He's good. He's got great self-reflection. And I have a witness for him that he's not the cool kid, because I won't let him on Snapchat. He can't go into these chat rooms and hang out for hours. And there's parameters. And I ask him to be, self-witness. And he has other kids in there that have no self-witness. And that's, I think, where bullying comes on. So this is so dynamic and so nuanced and so big that we have to have a multi-pronged approach to turning this very large ship around. Do you have hope?
Absolutely. 10 years ago, I sort of lost hope. And, but now, I mean, like Hillary, Andy Doan speaking at this summit as well. Hillary and Andy Doan and Richard Fried and Melanie Hempy and, Gene Rogers probably we were just like 25 years ago at a conference together, and just kind of, we were completely all just going like, oh my gosh, it's like I called it a tech train. The tech train is just going 100 miles an hour. Kids are falling off already. 25 years ago, kids are falling off the tech train, and nobody was noticing. Right? So where I've put a lot of effort in the last, I guess, 3 or 4 years, is in getting screens out of schools, and not just cell phones, everything out of schools, because it's not educational. Our kids' academic performance is plummeting, and it really sends a message to parents that exactly what you're talking about. Oh, it's the way it is today, and this is the way kids are today. They're super violent, and and it's the way it is, right? is schools are an institution that are, usually government funded, and everybody is all like on that tech train again, just going 100 miles. I mean, they're bringing AI into schools now. It's just, even though we've watched social media just destroy our kids in video games, and now AI is yet another, I call it the wild, wild west, right? And there's no sheriff, there's no regulations, there's no legislation that's protecting our children. Yet, it's just going 100 miles an hour. So it's to me, it's completely irresponsible, and schools are culpable and even liable for the harm that these devices and the media content they're watching on the internet in the school setting. It's just appalling what we're seeing.
Well, and
And
kids are smart because, I just saw something where kids are now, Google Docs, these Chromebooks are locked down, so they're safe. And kids are
oh my
smart. They're
God.
putting this
Oh yeah.
stuff in the URLs on the Google
Yeah.
Docs, and the kids are getting through the firewall through the Google Docs.
Kids are smart. They're smart with this stuff. All you have to do is Google, what's the way out of this, right? How can I get through, like you say, the firewall, and something will come up, and then they'll just do it. So all the blocker apps and tracker apps and all that kind of stuff. I'm not really keen on that. I'm way keener to teach, kids how to be responsible with the use of these devices. But I think we need to look at ourselves and go, geez, I don't manage my device very well. How can I expect my 3-year-old or my 10-year-old or my 13-year-old to manage their devices? You can't. They don't have the frontal lobe, the impulse control developmentally to even do that. So, I mean, now I love Australia, Sweden. There's certain countries that are really pushing this. France. So nothing until 14, right? And what that means is no iPads and no cell phones until they hit high
Is that
school.
really happening?
Yes, and no social media until 16. So Australia's banning social media for kids until they're 16 years of age. Now, how are they doing that? They're fumbling around. Like, will they ever be able to do that? I hope so. So this is something that absolutely needs to happen, and it's getting rid of the devices is way easier than managing. But because adults can't manage their devices, teachers can't manage their own devices, right? So how are they going to expect kids to manage their devices when they've got a phone in their hand and they're
I want to add this other dynamic in also that I do see a lot, and I do agree with you. I have watched several people from personal and at the airport or wherever I am. I'm a huge observer. That's one of my characteristics. And I do watch a lot of people adults have this mindless scroll behavior. Yes. I also see that parents also need a break, and they don't have the tools to manage what is before them. So they allow that to be the checkout. I was I was really, and I'm finding my voice and honoring the parent. And we have such a culture where if anyone else steps in and supports a parent with compassion, it's received as rude and stick to your own lane. And I can really understand that. But parents also need the education to understand they're doing. I saw this little 2-year-old that got out of the stroller at the basketball game, and the parents, instead of dealing with her, one parent going off and saying, this little girl wants to walk, let's give her some space, they just went like this with the iPad, and yeah, she went right back into the stroller and put it right here, and then she behaved. She did what she needed to do. And I think that's the other side of this coin that we really have to be outspoken about, is that uh, making decisions that support the development of the child versus taking an easy path for a very tired parent. And if a parent is very tired, what adjustments do they need to make in their life that would give them more energy versus taking that easy road for their child?
So I suggest to all families to start with an unplug. So whether it's going to be, if you're really tech centric, meaning your screen usage is really high, where everyone in your family is walking around with a cell phone, then, to do something really drastic, you're not going to get buy-in from anybody. But if you just say, okay, so we're going to start this one rule, we're going to enact one rule, is screens go in this drawer here during dinner. So, and now again, when we're putting in a restriction or something that's punitive for children that they're not going to like, we need to be very careful about first replacing the time that's spent with the screen with something that's enjoyable to them, right? So get in your head and okay, so how are we going to do this? How are we going to, kids love to help make dinner. Little kids, especially, love to help make dinner. Even my 13-year-old love to make dinner, right? So pull up the chairs and stand them on the chair, and they're going to stir this, or they're going to chop that, or they're going to, so dinner prep, dinner eat, and dinner cleanup is all screen free. So dinner eat is here again, is you're all sitting now, as a family in a potentially social situation, right? Where you're going to listen and ask questions as the parent, because that's the best way to start getting things out of kids, but have a little structure to it, right? So in my family of origin, every night, and it drove us crazy, crazy as a child, but I reflect back and I have fondness with it, is we had to say one thing that we liked about our day and one thing that we didn't. And when we were talking, everyone else had to be quiet, right? So my brothers couldn't interrupt me. So they'd be poking me and, like, I mean, but it was, dinners were always fun, I gotta say. And, my dad was always yelling at us. My mom was somewhere between yelling and laughing. We were like, spitting our ice into our drinks and, just making, my brother used to put his mashed potatoes on his face and stuff and shave it off. I mean, there's just like bedlam going on, right? But there was that little structure thing. And when my dad, when it was his turn, he'd just go on and on and on, some ridiculous story about Ernie Hekinen did this or that, at work or whatever. But the thing is, that taught us patience. It taught us to listen. It taught us to respect the other person. There was so much that happened with that one little thing.
That you
Tell us
didn't know
one
you were
good
getting,
thing that happened, one bad thing.
that you didn't realize you were getting. Yeah, I'm so on board with you. There's actually a movement to bring back family dinners. I can also, sit here and just say to you, and being really a voice for parents right now, is that when that habit starts, there is there is a reboot. And that's why we're doing the family reboot challenge as a part of this. There is a reboot that has to happen literally in the system of the child, because we've all seen examples where a child's phone's taken away and they break the break free container that it's in to not be able to get it for their phone detox, because it's truly an addiction. That's what an addictive being will do. And so when you're dealing with an addiction, it's not just, hey, we're not going to do screens tonight, we're going to change the pattern. There is a process that goes with supporting families and saying, preparing everybody, as you say, preparing everybody, letting them know what's happening, letting them know the why behind it, getting everybody to understand that we are a family, we are rebuilding connection. I promise you, if families start speaking to the why and the support structure and getting the kids to understand the importance of this, we see that it's important for you to be friends and to speak life into each other and to get along. And that's not happening right now. So we're going to do some changes to support that. So you can walk out of your childhood and have those memories like you had and have those memories like I had, because I feel so a lot of kids are walking out of their childhood with like, what happened? And they're not prepared for life. And again, Chris, like how to support families when we are dealing with a low grade addiction. And, when my kids, what I watched taking them off the addiction that I saw from from ed tech, which was not really educating them, there was violence. There was language violence, there was physical violence, there were shoes flying, pencils flying, so, I say all of this with such a heart for pivoting and supporting our children. And then I also say to the parents, yes, what we are all very aware that what's being asked here is not and is not just the easy road. It's the road that a parent is here to make and to reclaim family. And I agree with you in getting screens out of schools and really bringing that back. And you're just such a fierce warrior for our children. And
Well,
I love that about you.
occupational therapy, the premise of occupational therapy is that if that we need to engage in purposeful, meaningful activities in order to achieve good physical and mental health. So purposeful, meaningful activities are very different for everybody, right? So what I find meaningful and purposeful might be really different than you, Brittany, right? And then based on our skill set and our experience and all that, but there's a huge, huge array of activities out there that are available for our children. But it is now, because we are dealing with an addiction, it is now our responsibility as the adults to model healthy activity as well as provide opportunities for our children, a variety of opportunities for the children to build confidence and competence in their skills. So we have a whole array of kids now who hate sports, right? Certain kids still do pursue sports, but many kids, if you go into any gym, are just standing around because they've got some pass from their parent, that they don't have to do whatever the activity is, or they just don't show up for gym, they skip, right? So kids are hugely lacking in confidence and competence, right? Because we haven't taught them these skills. We haven't forced them to, do these things like play an instrument. Like when I was a kid, that was the trendy thing is, you had to play an instrument. I spent, I don't know, 3 or 4 years like playing a flute, and I never could get a sound out of it, but I was in this band class, with this teacher, and he didn't care. And anyway, but I was forced as a child to learn different skills and build competence. So, it became a part of who I am. And I eventually pulled the flute out again when I was in my 20s and took some lessons and actually, managed to play it. So we have to do skill check, not skill, interest checklists with our kids. And, that's just like, what would you like to do if we're going to put the screen away for half a day? What would you like to do, right? And they'll be, I don't know, it's gonna be boring. It's gonna be boring, right? Because they're scared to death of trying something new,
Right.
of having, and they don't know. I call it poverty of thought. There's nothing up there. When you say, what would you like to do? There's nothing up there, So,
That's so good.
and that's our
poverty
fault.
of thought. That is so good. Are you coining that? Because you need to. That is,
I say it all the time.
yeah, that
Like
is so
I did this little
true.
printing test, with kids just to see what their output speeds are. And so I'll say, okay, so they copy print for 2 minutes, and we count the number of letters, and then they need to compose print for 2 minutes, right? So I've done this test for 35 years in schools, right? And I'd say, okay, so here I take a minute or whatever, and think of something you're going to write about for 2 minutes, right? And then I'd say go, and they'd write for 2 minutes, right? Today, it's unbelievable. 15, 20 minutes sometimes, I'm sitting with a kid going, there's nothing up there, I'm like, well, what did you do this weekend? Video games. Can you write about what video game you played? I can't remember. It's just like I'm digging, digging, digging to get some story in that child's brain, and it's just not there. It's just astonishing because they're spoon-fed all this content on the internet, right? Their whole world is programmed on the internet. That's why they love it. They love going to the phone, and they can watch anything, they can go anywhere, they can do anything they want, right? And you take that away, and there's nothing up there, right? So
It
that's our fault. And
hijacks the gift of boredom.
yes, and boredom is the origins of creativity. So
Yeah.
when my kid said to me, I'm bored, I'd say, well, then you're boring. Go figure out something to do. It's not my job, to but my kids weren't glued to screens because they're in their 30s and 40s, right? So now we have kids that are glued to screens and addicted to screens. And so it is our onus. The onus is on us to help them to find those activities that they're interested in. I have a huge checklist. It's got 4 different categories. It's 100 things you can do other than video games, right?
Can they
And
find
I
this on
give
your
it to all my
website?
kids, and I say, let's go through this, and we're
Yeah.
gonna find one that you're interested in. And I always do. There's always kids are interested in lots of stuff. They just don't know they are, you know,
Yeah.
because of that lack of self, right?
Oh,
What are you interested in? I don't know.
now does that also tie into the pruning that we talked about in the beginning of this with the frontal lobe?
Absolutely. So we're working with a different brain. The brains in kids today are wired differently. And we want they if you don't have tracks to your frontal lobe, you can't learn, you can't think. And I mean, I'm kind of doing this big polarity thing here. If you don't have tracks to frontal lobe, nobody loses all their tracks to frontal lobe. But what the studies are showing are areas of atrophy. So it's fMRI studies showing areas like that are dark that have atrophied because of lack of stimulus. So this is something that, and this is with our gamers, that the one study that I'm thinking of, this was done in 2011. There were a whole series of studies done on gamers showing this, and yet so few people even know this information, right? But now there's massive studies going on. The ABCD study is showing the same thing, and they're looking at even young kids. There's one study that's paramount. This was Dimitri Christakis did this study in 2009, I think. He's a pediatric researcher. So he worked with 4-year-olds, and there were 3 groups. The group 1 spent like 15 minutes drawing a picture. Group 2 spent 15 minutes drawing or watching a very slow paced cartoon called Caillou. And it's very boring. Yeah, it's very slow paced. Screen changes every something like 10 or 11 seconds. There would be a screen change, right? The third group watched SpongeBob's, which has a screen change every second. It's very frenetic. It's very violent, a lot of violence, right? So he then did cognitive testing. He started at about 9 minutes. Like he just kind of thought, well, at 9 minutes, I'm going to stop what they're doing, the drawing, the watching Caillou, watching SpongeBob's, and I'm going to do a cognitive test and see if there's any change. It was astounding because researchers have to start at somewhere, right? Where they think, well, there won't be a change at 9 minutes. But we'll test them in again at whatever 12 minutes and 15 minutes and whatever. They develop their protocols for the research. Anyway, he saw a 1 standard deviation decrease in cognition with SpongeBob's after 9 minutes.
What does that mean?
Not with Caillou, not obviously the people drawing a picture, right? So what he highlighted at that time was the pacing of the stimuli and the violent factor. And he was one of the lead people with the American Academy of Pediatrics to set in place a guideline that no violent media content before the age of 6, that they shouldn't be exposed to any violent media content before the age of 6 because of this rapid deterioration of cognition. So when we see on a test that the cognition has decreased, and 1 standard deviation has significantly decreased, right? Then you've got to wonder, oh my gosh, what happens when these kids watch an hour of SpongeBob's or binge watch SpongeBob's on a Saturday morning? You're going to have a brain that's like nothing there. So when you say turn that off and, go brush your teeth or whatever, you're not going to get a great response, right? Because their brains, now does the brain come back? The brain's very plastic. And I used to always say for years, I used to say to parents, it's okay. You just got to start reining them in now, and you can actually change the wiring of the brain. But what studies are showing is that by age 12, half of the brain is hardwired.
Oh my
So, when a baby's born, there's that, like I said, there's the proliferation and pruning process that's happening, right? At about age 12, about half of that's done. By age 20, it's pretty much all hardwired. Now, we know, like, if Granny had a stroke and, she couldn't walk and now she's walking, there's still plasticity, even at the age of 80, right? But we want to really put our interventions in place when they're young. Like
God.
between the ages of 0 and 2, kids' brains triple in size, and the pruning and the proliferation is super active. And then 3 to 5, it's starting to slow down a little bit. By age 12, like I say, half the process is already completed, right? With the modeling of the brain, the wiring of the brain. So our pediatricians say 0 to 2, nothing. And even in Australia, they've moved that up to 3. 0 to 3, no media content. No even sitting on mommy's lap while you're watching Oprah or, a hockey game or whatever. No media exposure. It's too fast paced. It's too frenetic. It's too visually stimulating. Like you'll see infants like looking at the screen like that. They're locked into a visual gaze. Their visual gaze can lock because the brain isn't able to control. They can't even look away if they wanted to, right? They just get stuck like that. So
But
that's
that
really
locking is
bad
also
for them.
programming. It's programming. It's intake. It's like that locking when with what I know for children, when the baby is locked on something with that dead stare, there's wiring happening in the brain that's interpreting that intake. That's why they like, where are you? And people think it's cute and charming, but they have to understand what's really happening in the brain.
It's scary when little kids, I have parents say that, oh, but Johnny likes it. Johnny likes to sit in his little bucket seat in front of a TV. One of the things that I always check is the back of the head. When I work with young kids, I check the back of the head. And if there's no hair there, then they're spending way too much time in bucket seats in front of TV, right? Or just lying on their back, right? This is a form of neglect, and it's something that the like the American Physiotherapy Association is really launching a big thing on this. Is that we need to get kids up and moving. We can't just put them in strollers and bucket seats in front of TVs and high chairs. It's another one that I see kids, that they're stuck in front of a
Swings,
TV in a high chair.
swings. I know parents that put their kid in swings for hours. You're amazing. We've had a rock star conversation. I want to do it again. Can we do it again? Can we do this again? You are just such a wealth of information, and I know our parents are so served by all this data that you're sharing. Um, we need to stay in touch, Chris, and we need to, support you and getting the message out there. And you have resources for parents on your website, and you have a course that they can go to and take. So tell them a little bit about that.
So I've been doing hundreds, literally, of workshops all over the world. And during COVID, everything just dried up, of course. And I took the opportunity to convert all my workshops into webinars. So I have about 75 hours of webinars, and predominantly for parents, teachers, and clinicians. So there's also a webinar for teens that's free. It's a 5-hour certification webinar for teens to become screen busters in their schools so that they can go into classrooms and do what I call tech talks with younger kids. So after all these years, I think I said before we started, I've tried all these things that haven't worked, and lots of things that haven't worked, and a couple that have. And I'm really married to the peer education model, so that we're using peers to talk to each other, right? We want to build the capacity, the educational capacity, build the knowledge for teens so that they feel confident to then talk to younger kids or even their own peers, right? So there's a free training on my website for teens. And there's a variety of different workshops in 3 different areas. So the ones that we've been talking about here is in the technology management category. So I've developed a course. It's a 3-day course for anyone who wants to take it, but I'm really targeting clinicians and teachers for that course. So they become certified in balanced technology management. And what they get out of that course is they get a certification and CEUs, continuing ed units, but also they get a slide deck, a PowerPoint slide deck, so that they can go out and start doing workshops. So they can do workshops for parents, workshops for teachers, if they're in a school setting. So if one person is certified in the school in balanced technology management, they would be the key person to start working toward setting screen rules in the schools. And that would be not that they're setting the rules, it's that they learn how to facilitate a discussion in their own school. How to everyone that takes these courses gets the 75-page tech toolkit. And
Right.
in that is surveys and brochures and handouts and, the 10 red flags. How do you know if a kid's overusing, little check boxes. So there's stuff in there for parents, for teachers, and for clinicians, and they can reproduce that data and
Give them the website. That's the Reconnect.
reconnectwebinars.com.
Yeah. Okay. You're
Yeah.
amazing. Thank you so much. I look forward to our paths side by side. I don't like the idea of crossing, but I guess we are crossing paths today. I've really been so much a champion for you since the moment we talked. I can't thank you enough for what you're doing for our kids, and just that you keep putting yourself out there.
And Brittany, I want to honor you and thank you too, because I love the way you frame this. It's really like we all need to work together to kind of reimagine. You started with beyond the screen. That's my tagline for Reconnect webinars. We really need to reimagine a life without screens, because ways we're using screens today in schools and homes is not sustainable. We're not raising kids who are going to grow up and and have jobs and be healthy and be happy and have partners, and create children, grandchildren for us. We're creating something really different, and it's not sustainable. So time to turn it around.
Thank you. Yeah, Andy Doan speaks to this with what's happening in Japan. It's already happened, the Hokikikumora, and it's really bad. It's really the wrong direction. So thank you, and my friend, we'll we'll keep going with this.
And thank you everyone who's here for watching and listening. And
thank you. Have a beautiful